Venezuela President Hugo Chavez is fighting for his life. The country's vice president announced on television that Chavez continues to undergo treatment more than 2 months after his latest cancer surgery in Cuba. Joining us to discuss this is Ryan Craggs, HuffPost Associate World Editor. Ryan, Chavez hasn't spoken publicly since before his latest operation, I believe, in December. It's likely a sign, perhaps, that things are not getting better for him. Is that true?
It all depends on how you look at things. There's always sort of a question of what is misinformation and what is intentional with Venezuela, because a lot of the media is state-run, and nobody has actually seen Chavez in person since the last time that he went to Cuba. So about 2 weeks ago, there was he was supposedly a photo of him in a hospital bed with his daughters at his side. But even yesterday, there was a scare where CNN Chile reported that he was actually dead.
Right.
So CNN couldn't confirm it itself. So then it became a story of, okay, is this guy actually alive? Because the source was pretty questionable of like who was saying that Chavez was actually dead. So it's never really known.
And with Chavez, with Venezuela, as you say, especially with the media there on the ground, I mean, it's always hard to decipher and distinguish what's propaganda and what's not. Even the Vice President Maduro saying Chavez's health had suffered, and the reason cited is because he had dedicated himself, his body and soul, to his work as a president. So obviously they're already trying to present his legacy potentially in a way. What can we expect for Chavez's legacy?
I mean, it's really kind of all over the place when you think about, like, there was a coup in Venezuela, like, I mean, years ago, and that has a certain aspect in it. But I mean, he's beloved, I think, in Venezuela for a number of reasons by, like, especially poorer people,
right,
because of just the way that his socialist government has worked, and, like, I mean, how cheap gasoline is, and healthcare and education. He's dumped all of these, like, petrodollars into helping poor people in the country, but that isn't necessarily a sustainable model, and like, it's not necessarily investing in the future for Venezuela. So it's really, I mean, there are pluses and minuses to his legacy, and obviously there's things that you have to consider what his the geopolitical aspects of him being gone would be, because he's like BFFs with Cuba,
right?
And okay, so maybe he's doing good things with these petrodollars, but like, is it necessarily moving the country forward?
Right.
Hard to say.
And our relationship with Venezuela, of course, has always been a point of contention.
Sure.
And perhaps the more practical question that we actually have some people asking us in our comment section, Monkeyman365 saying, who will be his successor? And also W.T. Effington saying, will they have an election or a successor?
The last news that I had read was that, I mean, basically his current vice president, Nicolas Maduro, is sort of his hand-picked successor. But it's unclear if it would be this guy. Like, it all came down to Chavez missing his inauguration last month, because then it became a matter of the Supreme Court in Venezuela whether or not he could actually miss his inauguration. And then if he were to be sworn in, like, say, on his deathbed or something, could he just be sworn in as the president simply to say, okay, now I'm going to abdicate and, like, give the power to Maduro? Or if they're going to have another election, I mean, that's still unclear, because the guy that he faced in this previous election, the one he just won, was actually probably the most legitimate candidate that he has faced so far in all of these quote-unquote elections that he has won.
Right, and it's worth mentioning, there's students who have been protesting, as a result of Chavez remaining in this military hospital. They're actually demanding more transparency around the reporting of what his health is. I mean, even going as far as, if I just take this, I don't know if this is going to pop up, but this is the hashtag. You can see it's called, I can't pronounce this well, but Operación Soberania. A lot of people chaining themselves down and trying to draw attention to the fact that they don't know as much as they're kind of in the dark like we are.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it's like people also say that the U.S. didn't land on the moon.
Right.
So, I mean, I guess unless you were actually there, there's no way to know for sure, because there's already, more conspiracies of him being in that hospital bed, whether it was like he was brain dead, because the guy that said that he was dead yesterday had also said that Chavez has been brain dead since like December 30th. So if that's the case, then maybe that photo was staged previously, because, again, more conspiracy theories from this guy. He said if Chavez has been this sick and, like, hospitalized, he's going to lose a lot of weight. And that photo that came out 2 weeks ago, it didn't look like a guy who had been that sick for that long.
Certainly, and there's people who are also pointing to the fact that he's being treated presumably exclusively by Cuban doctors, which is one of the things that the students are protesting against, this notion of a Cuban intervention.
People don't even know what kind of cancer he has. He's been sick since June, like 2011, like mid-2011, and all that's known is that he has some form of cancer in his pelvis.
Right.
But I mean, whatever that means, that could mean a whole slew of different things. And obviously, that's kind of a bad area to have any kind of cancer, I guess. I'm not a doctor, so I won't
Right,
know that.
neither am I. Well,
Sure.
I don't know, Egberto, Phil, if you guys are doctors, but what do you make of this story, Egberto? I want to show...
Operación Soberana is the word. Operación Soberana. I'm from
Operación
Central
Soberania.
America.
Thank you.
Yeah, Soberana. But I'm from that part of the world, Panama, Central America, and I tell you, it wouldn't surprise me if he is already dead. I'm not saying that I have any information whatsoever, but that said, it is. I think for that matter, it was really necessary for them to sort of keep him alive to see where do they go from there. I mean, Venezuela is one of those countries that has had this disparity that he started to solve. So while a lot of us out here hate this guy, he was actually pretty good for Venezuela, for the average Venezuelan person.
And speaking about the average Venezuelan, I mean, Phil, you know, we've heard these reports that students are you know, chaining themselves down and trying to protest. This is some of the photos that are circulating on Instagram, for example. I'm just going to click through them, but what's your reaction? I mean, Egberto saying he's done a lot of good for Venezuela and for, you know, as Ryan pointed out, the let's say, poorer segments of the population.
Looks like the younger people want what a lot of people are wanting all over the world, and that's just more transparency, more freedom, more of a, you know, an open Western democracy and less of a dictatorship. But yeah, I mean, I don't doubt that he's been good for the poor people there, but I don't think Sean Penn is going to take this well.
Say it again?
Well, I think some people would say it's a dictatorship.
No, he was, you see, and that is what's so interesting. Their election was able to be called rather quickly because they have national computerized ballots that told them who won the election immediately, unlike what we have here in the United States. And he was elected by the vast majority of his people. We have a Congress here in the United States that was not elected by the people because more than 1 million people voted for one party while the other party remains controlled.
Now,
So
Egberto, don't let Florida spoil the whole country for you, okay?
I know, but I know, but we have to be careful when we start talking about other people's democracy without looking inwardly at what's really going on here.
Well, I would agree with you, Egberto. I would agree with you, Egberto, on that point, especially when it comes to transparency. Obviously, we can't compare transparency as it would apply here in Venezuela, but Librab 103 also making this point, no different than the transparency quote from our government. But right. Egberto, you wouldn't argue that Chavez came to power through free and fair elections, would you?
No, I would not. But I would say that he came to the power because of a system that really hurt most of the population. For those of us at that part of the world, we understand what an oligarchy really is, and that is a system where most people do not get the spoils. If you look at Venezuela, it's swimming in oil, and most of the population poor. There's something wrong there. Most of the population uneducated. There's something wrong with those who were running the country Chavez.
And obviously, Ryan, you know, this conversation is one that's going to have potentially, if Chavez did in fact die, it would have huge implications for the region, but also for our relationship with Venezuela and for the entire world, presumably. If you look at this trends map, this is just monitoring and tracking the hashtag Chavez, where conversations are being had online. Of course, unsurprising, you know, perhaps to all of us. You see in South America, it's being discussed in, you know, Venezuela and Peru. But I'm curious, in Europe it's being discussed, even in Turkey, but no one in the US seems to find this to be an interesting story. Are you surprised by that?
Well, no, not at all. I mean, part of it...
Sean Penn does.
Right. Other than Sean Penn.
Sure. I mean, there's all sorts of impacts, but it's hard, I think, for the average person to really, like, you know, get too excited about Chavez, because what do people know about him?
Right.
They know that he's a guy who's a leader of a country somewhere in South America. Yeah. But if you ask the average person where even that country was, they wouldn't be able to tell you.
Right.
So, I mean, there will be ripple effects from his death. Again, like with how involved he is with Cuba, and the fact that Castro was just, you know, he has another 5 years in office. I mean, things could change. Obviously, anyone could say that the world may change a lot in 5 years, but the face of Latin America really may be changing quite a bit, because, I mean, 5 years from now, you may not have Chavez anymore, you won't have Castro anymore, so you won't have these strong, like, socialist and communist countries. So it's like, then what does that region become?
Right.
You know, I want to just say one thing, and that is, I think the reason we don't hear a lot about Chavez is sort of fear, because we are becoming a lot of what a lot of these other countries are. If you look at a lot of the stories, again, yes, another plug, Huffington Post had quite a few stories on income disparity. You see that we're not a whole lot different from a lot of these countries, and there's a lot of reaction that's been happening in Chile and all these other countries that don't get any coverage here because we wouldn't want that spoilage, if you will, to infect our own underclass.
Right, and that's a good point. And for those who don't know, it's worth mentioning. You know, the U.S. on average used to, in the late '90s, import about 1.6 million barrels of oil from Venezuela. Now it's down to, I think, near 750,000, but still a considerable amount. So perhaps we should start talking about hashtag Chavez. Ryan, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Community, there's so much more coming up, but actually no, forgive me. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to let you go because you will be back as the conversation always continues, as you guys know. So thanks for joining us. Coming up next, we have some Massachusetts schools are sending parents fat letters, and we have one parent's story.